Have you ever wondered what drives some of the most perplexing human behaviors, especially when they manifest in tragic and deeply disturbing ways? Some crimes, thankfully rare, leave investigators with more questions than answers, not just about how they happened, but why they included such unusual, seemingly symbolic actions. Today, we're going to explore a specialized and often misunderstood area of criminal investigation: what ritual behavior can tell us about an offender. This isn't about sensational headlines or dramatic thrillers. It's about a careful, evidence-based approach to understanding the profound psychological dimensions that can be hidden within certain crimes. We'll delve into how forensic experts look beyond the obvious to interpret patterns, symbols, and actions that might seem extraneous to the crime itself, but are absolutely critical for understanding the person behind it. It's a journey into the complex interplay of psychology, culture, and forensics. When we talk about ritual behavior in a forensic context, it's essential to understand that we're not always referring to actual organized cults or ancient spiritual practices. While those rare instances can occur, more often this term describes what we call signature behaviors. Think of it this way: a modus operandi, or MO, is how a criminal commits a crime, the practical methods they use, like picking a specific type of lock or using a certain weapon. An MO can change and evolve as an offender learns. Signature behaviors, however, are different. They are actions or elements that are not necessary for the crime to be completed, but they fulfill a deep psychological need or fantasy for the perpetrator. They are personal, symbolic, and often more consistent, leaving a sort of psychological fingerprint. Imagine an artist who always signs their work in a very particular, unique way, not because it's required for the painting, but because it's deeply meaningful to them. That's a bit like a signature behavior. So what do investigators look for? The clues can be subtle and require careful interpretation. They might find unusual wound patterns, not just what caused the injury, but the way it was inflicted, or the presence of ceremonial items, perhaps wax strippings, specific oils, or incense. Sometimes the victim's body might be positioned in an unusual or symbolic way, or they might be found with specific objects placed on or around them. There might be occultic symbols present, or even instances of tattooing or branding on the victim or at the scene. It's crucial to remember that each of these indicators must be examined with an open mind. For example, missing body parts could suggest a ritualistic motive, but they could also indicate dismemberment for concealment, fetishism, or even trophy-taking. The date a crime occurs might be significant if it aligns with an equinox or solstice, but it could also be purely coincidental. The key is to consider all possible explanations before jumping to conclusions about a ritualistic motive. This careful, measured approach is paramount. Understanding the motivation behind these ritualistic elements is where the real complexity lies. Most often, these actions are driven by an individual's personal fantasies or deep psychological needs, things like a desire for power, control, or even a specific type of sexual gratification. In these cases, offenders might appropriate or mimic religious, occult, or symbolic elements they've seen in media or read about without actually adhering to a specific organized belief system. They're using the trappings of ritual to fulfill their own psychological urges. In much rarer instances, a crime can genuinely link to an extremist interpretation of religious or occult ideologies. We've seen examples, though uncommon, linked to fringe groups that misinterpret or abuse elements of systems like certain forms of Satanism, Palo Mayombe, Santeria, or Voodoo, citizens. When criminal acts occur, they are typically committed by individuals or small fringe groups who have distorted these beliefs, rather than by the belief systems themselves. Investigators must be extremely careful to distinguish between individual psychological pathologies and organized belief systems, avoiding unfair blame or prejudice. The types of crimes that might exhibit these ritualistic elements are varied. We're not just talking about homicides, but also animal mutilation, severe child abuse, both physical and sexual, kidnapping, sex crimes, arson, vandalism, trespassing, and even human trafficking, especially when linked to group practices or beliefs. To unravel these complex layers, investigators rely on a multidisciplinary approach. Behavioral analysis and criminal profiling are vital. These techniques integrate psychological and behavioral principles to help understand an offender's motivation, how they select victims, and the sequence of their crimes. While not a definitive science, like DNA analysis, profiling acts as a crucial investigative tool, helping direct resources and narrow down possibilities. Beyond profiling, forensic science provides concrete evidence, while experts from fields like psychology, criminology, and religious studies all contribute to a comprehensive understanding. Agencies like the FBI's behavioral analysis units and trained forensic psychologists and criminologists are at the forefront of this specialized work. This area of study, while not always in the daily news cycle, remains an enduringly complex and challenging field for investigators. It promises profound insights into the human mind, but it also presents significant analytical and ethical challenges. Decoding deeply embedded psychological and cultural motivations demands a continuously evolving, specialized approach. Now, it's impossible to discuss ritual behavior in investigations without addressing some of the major controversies and public debates surrounding it. One of the most impactful was the Satanic Panic of the 1980s and 90s. This was a widespread moral panic involving thousands of unsubstantiated pieces of satanic ritual abuse. Allegations, often fueled by recovered memory therapy and media sensationalism, painted a picture of widespread conspiracies involving satanic cults engaged in heinous crimes. This period severely impacted the credibility of many involved professions and serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of speculation over substantiated evidence. The legacy of the Satanic Panic highlights several ongoing challenges. There's still a recognized lack of standardized categories and empirical studies to adequately distinguish between ritual homicides committed for genuinely sacred motivations versus secular ones driven by personal fantasy. Law enforcement professionals themselves often disagree on the extent, types, and true motives of crimes labeled as ritualistic. A significant challenge is distinguishing legitimate religious practice from criminality. Investigators face a constant tightrope walk, needing to avoid misinterpreting sincere, alternative religious practices as criminal acts, which can create tension between protecting religious freedoms and investigating alleged criminal activity. This requires sensitivity, education, and respect for diverse belief systems. The credibility of allegations and evidence is always paramount. The Satanic Panic taught us a painful lesson about the dangers of sensational narratives over concrete evidence. Claims of widespread, organized ritual crime often lack solid proof, leading to necessary debates about the validity of recovered memories and the existence of large-scale conspiracies. We must always ground our conclusions in fact, not fear or speculation. Media portrayals often sensationalize ritualistic elements, which can easily lead to moral panics and, tragically, misplacing blame on innocent communities or individuals. Investigators are continually urged to base their conclusions purely on evidence and critical thinking, rather than allowing themselves to be swayed by external pressures or dramatic narratives. Historically, accusations of ritual murder, particularly against Jewish communities, serve as a deeply harmful example of cultural prejudice and misattribution. This history underscores why a rigorous, evidence-based approach is not just good practice, but an ethical imperative. Finally, while behavioral analysis and criminal profiling are invaluable tools, it's important to remember their limits. They are investigative aids, not definitive scientific methods like DNA analysis. Their interpretations are subject to ongoing development and require constant refinement and critical assessment. As we look to the future, understanding ritual behavior in high-level investigations will continue to demand a consistently nuanced approach. The path forward emphasizes the absolute necessity of integrating forensic science, behavioral psychology, and cultural knowledge. The ability to navigate significant controversies and ethical considerations surrounding religious freedom, unsubstantiated claims, and media sensationalism will be crucial. Our goal must always be to ensure that investigations are thoroughly grounded in evidence and critical thinking. By approaching this complex subject with empathy, rigor, and an unwavering commitment to facts, we can strive to better understand the darkest corners of human behavior, not to sensationalize, but to shed light, seek justice, and perhaps prevent future harm. Thank you for joining me on this exploration.